Hello dear listener, please subscribe to our channel. Enjoy watching. I always thought Christmas was supposed to be about joy, love, and togetherness. It's funny, isn't it? How a season meant for giving can reveal the ugliest side of people. If you're wondering how I learned that lesson, well, pull up a chair. This story's not for the faint-hearted. It started a week before Christmas. Lila, my wife of 7 years, had been acting off. Don't get me wrong, she's always been busy, a corporate lawyer climbing the ranks. But lately, there was something else. Her laughter didn't feel the same, her kisses were rushed, and she clung to her phone like it held the cure for cancer. I'm not the kind of guy who jumps to conclusions. I've always trusted her. But that week, something gnawed at me, a tiny voice whispering that everything wasn't as it seemed. That voice got louder when I found a dinner receipt from a fancy downtown restaurant, a place we'd never been together. The receipt was tucked into the pocket of her coat, along with a tube of lipstick I'd never seen her wear. Working late again tonight? I asked casually as she grabbed her keys. It was the third night in a row. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Yeah. Big case. Don't wait up. I watched her drive away, my stomach churning. That's when I decided to find out the truth. The first thing I did was check her phone records. A number appeared over and over again, at odd hours. Ryan. I'd met him once at a company event. He was everything I wasn't. Sleek, polished, charming in that shallow, superficial way. A textbook charmer. I'm not proud of what I did next. I hacked into her email. It wasn't hard. She's not exactly tech-savvy. What I found confirmed my worst fears. Emails, texts, photos, all of them laced with flirtation, some crossing lines I'd never thought she'd cross. The messages dripped with excitement, their plans carefully hidden under the guise of work trips and meetings. One text hit me like a sledgehammer. Can't wait for New Year's at the cabin. Just us. Our cabin. My grandparents' lake house. The place where we'd spent countless weekends building memories. She was taking him there. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I'm not the kind of guy who loses his temper. Instead, I decided to make her betrayal the centerpiece of her downfall. The next day, while she was at work, I drove to the Christmas market downtown. A man was carving ice sculptures in the square, his hands deftly chiseling away at a block of ice to reveal a swan. I stood there, mesmerized. How long does it take to learn something like that? I asked. Depends on your patience, he said with a grin. I signed up for his week-long crash course. Every evening, while Lila thought I was at work, I was learning the art of sculpting ice. The tools were intimidating at first. Chisels, saws, blowtorches. But with every passing day, I got better. The final sculpture would be my masterpiece. On Christmas Eve, Lila insisted we go to her company's holiday party. I played the role of the supportive husband, smiling at all the right moments, laughing at the stale jokes of her colleagues. Ryan was there, of course. Watching them together made my blood boil, but I kept my composure. You two seem close, I said, feigning innocence. Lila's face flushed. Ryan chuckled nervously. We've been working a lot together on the Daniels case, he said. Lucky me, I replied. I get to hear all about it at home. They exchanged a glance, and I knew. They thought they were clever. But they had no idea what I had in store. The days between Christmas and New Year's were a whirlwind of activity, a flurry of plans and meticulous execution. Each day, I wore a mask of normalcy, careful to avoid suspicion as I pieced everything together. I began with the invitation, not to Ryan, but to Lila. I've got a surprise planned for New Year's Eve, I told her over dinner, letting my tone carry just the right amount of excitement. Something special. Her fork paused midair. What kind of surprise? She asked, curiosity flickering in her eyes. I shrugged, feigning nonchalance. You'll see. Bring Ryan. He's been working so hard. I thought we could celebrate together. The hesitation was palpable. Her eyes darted to mine, searching for something. Doubt? Suspicion? Guilt? I couldn't be sure. But I perfected my mask. I held her gaze, my smile warm, my expression as open as an unwritten page. That's thoughtful of you, she finally said, her voice tight. It's the least I can do, I replied, returning my attention to my meal as though the matter was settled. Later that night, as she texted on her phone, no doubt confirming my words with Ryan, I began to set the real plan in motion. The next morning, I drove up to the lake house. The place had been in my family for decades, a quiet retreat nestled by a frozen lake surrounded by dense woods. It had an air of serene isolation, perfect for summer escapes, or, in this case, the stage for my carefully constructed revenge. First, I cleared the cabin of anything that could be used to call for help. Phones, landlines, and the old emergency radio, all removed. Then, I disabled the heating system. The cabin would be cold, but not unbearable. I wanted them uncomfortable, not dead. Next came the centerpiece. Using everything I'd learned during the ice sculpting workshop, I began carving. It was a grueling process, hours spent hunched over the massive blocks of ice I'd transported from the city. Each chisel stroke was deliberate, every detail painstakingly refined. By the time I finished, the sculpture was nothing short of a masterpiece. Lila and Ryan, locked in a tender embrace, their expressions frozen in an eternal moment of betrayal. The final step was logistics. I set up spotlights around the lake, their beams perfectly positioned to illuminate the sculpture. A few tools were left behind, a chisel, a dull saw, but nothing effective enough to destroy the ice. Inside the cabin, I stocked the fridge with just enough supplies to last a few days. I wanted them to feel trapped, helpless, but not entirely without hope. When I returned home that evening, Lila was already packing. "Do I need anything specific?" she asked, her tone casual. I shook my head. "Just yourselves," I said, smiling. "The rest is taken care of." Her back was turned, so she didn't see the way my smile twisted into something darker. She had no idea what awaited her. The lake house was perfect. Isolated, serene, surrounded by a frozen expanse of ice and snow. I spent the morning of New Year's Eve setting the stage. The sculpture was the centerpiece, a life-size depiction of Lila and Ryan, locked in a tender embrace. Every detail was painstakingly carved, from the folds of their clothing to the smug expressions on their faces. I positioned it on the frozen lake, illuminated by spotlights. The rest of the setup was equally meticulous. Their phones and car keys encased in blocks of ice. The cabin's heating system disabled. A stocked fridge to ensure they wouldn't starve, but no way to call for help. When Lila and Ryan arrived, they were greeted by the sight of the ice sculpture. Lila gasped, her face going pale. "What is this?" she whispered. "A gift," I said, smiling. "For both of you." Ryan tried to play it cool. "It's impressive," he said, but his voice wavered. "Open your gifts," I said, handing them each a small box. Inside, they found their phones and car keys, frozen solid. "What the hell is this?" Ryan snapped. "Oh, don't worry," I said. "The ice will melt. Eventually." Lila's eyes filled with tears. "Please, let's talk about this," she begged. I shook my head. "Talk? Like the two of you talked behind my back?" As the hours passed, their panic grew. They tried breaking the ice blocks, but the tools I'd left were dull by design. The temperature in the cabin dropped steadily. They huddled together for warmth, their betrayal laid bare under the harsh glare of the spotlights. By the time I returned the next morning, the sculpture had begun to melt. Lila and Ryan were shivering, their faces etched with desperation. "Learned your lesson?" I asked. They nodded, too cold to speak. "Good," I said, tossing them a set of keys. "The spare car's in the garage. Drive safe." You might think I went too far. Maybe I did. But here's the thing about betrayal. It cuts deep. And sometimes, the only way to heal is to let the wound bleed dry. Lila and Ryan got what they deserved. And as for me, I walked away, finally free from the lies. If you leave a comment, tell us what you think about the story you heard. It's important to us and will help us find and tell stories that you find interesting. Thank you for watching us.